A report by Human Rights Watch criticises Israeli banks, saying they're complicit in expanding illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank by providing loans and mortgages for construction. Well, Chris Doyle is the director of the Council for the Advance of Arab-British Understanding. Joins me in the studio now. Chris, good to have you with us. So this idea that banks Israeli banks are ignoring their human rights obligations by providing the financing for illegal settlement construction, what do you make of that?
Well, it's absolutely true. Now, what we have seen by way of background is expansion of settlements in the West Bank, all illegal under international law, to the extent that there are now over 600,000 Israeli civilians, settlers, in the West Bank, in the area that the international community now for decades expects one day to become a Palestinian state. Now, those settlements, of course, have been aided and abetted by the Israeli government in a variety of ways, but also banks and other financial institutions, insurance companies, for example. So they get the loans and the mortgages. This allows them to expand. Even because they are national priority areas under Israeli planning, they get even softer loans. And actually, if you are an Israeli citizen, it's very attractive to go and live in these settlements because you get better infrastructure, better roads, better water than you would in many Israeli cities, which are more crowded and the infrastructure isn't as well up to date.
But is it right to blame Israeli banks when actually they're just arguably following the policy that's been set down by the Israeli government?
Well, obviously, the Israeli government is the primary party responsible, and the fact is that the international community has repeatedly failed to ensure that its own laws, including a Security Council resolution that was passed just last December, are actually implemented and respected. But there is an obligation on banks, and not just Israeli ones, not to actually aid and abet this process. These are violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention, very serious body of international law, and they should not be participant to what is going on.
So the banks are taking the decision voluntarily to ignore their obligations. So what can be done about this? Because as we've seen, even though these settlements are against international law, no one's really forced the Israeli government to back out of this. So what can we do against the banks?
What Human Rights Watch are calling for, and indeed many other organisations, it is actually that other banks, international banks, do not do business with Israeli banks until they meet these human rights obligations. And there is a very strong belief amongst those who have been calling for recognition of Palestinian rights and for Israel to uphold its obligations, that the only way this is going to happen is through some form of pressure. Now, there are many governments, particularly in Europe and the United States, of course, who object to any form of sanctions against the state of Israel. But I think it's very important to remind people that these settlements aren't in the sovereign state of Israel. These are in occupied territory, so they fall out of its domain. It's not about sanctions. It's about bringing Israel into line with international law. And without that, it would be very difficult to actually get the two-state solution that all these countries are so keen on bringing about.
Chris, interesting stuff. Thank you very much indeed for speaking with us.
Pleasure.
Chris Doyle there.